It was a bright, sunny afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood where families lived in neat rows of houses, each with trimmed lawns and colorful flower beds. Children's laughter filled the air as they rode bikes, kicked balls, and played games on the sidewalks. One of these children was a young black boy who loved spending his afternoons outside. He had curly hair that bounced when he ran, and a wide smile that always seemed to appear, even when things didn't go as planned. He lived a few houses down from a woman who had recently moved into the neighborhood. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp features and a stern expression that rarely softened. From the moment she arrived, she had kept to herself, often peering out her windows as though constantly observing the street. On this particular afternoon, the boy decided to ride his bike a little further than usual. He loved exploring, even if it meant just pedaling a few blocks beyond his usual path. As he rode past the new neighbor's house, he waved at a friend across the street. That small wave caught the neighbor's attention. She quickly became alert, her eyes narrowing as she watched the boy from behind her curtains. She didn't know him, had never interacted with him, and immediately her mind started racing with worry. Without any reason other than fear and suspicion, she interpreted the boy's presence near her property as a potential threat. The boy continued riding, enjoying the wind in his face and the freedom of the afternoon. He didn't see the neighbor stepping outside, phone in hand. She walked slowly to the edge of her driveway, keeping a careful distance, and dialed the police. Her voice was firm and urgent as she explained the situation, describing the boy as acting suspiciously near her home. She mentioned that he was black, as if that alone justified her concern. She emphasized her fear, painting the situation as more serious than it actually was. In her mind, she was protecting her home, but she didn't stop to think about the boy, his intentions, or how he might feel. Meanwhile, the boy's bike rolled along the quiet street, unaware of the storm that was about to descend. He waved to a neighbor walking a dog, calling out a cheerful hello. The dog barked and wagged its tail, and the boy laughed, leaning on the handlebars to catch his breath. He had been riding for nearly an hour, enjoying the sunshine and freedom with no thought of danger. He didn't even notice the neighbor's gaze following him from across the street. There was nothing unusual about his behavior, nothing threatening. He was just a child enjoying a normal day. Within minutes, police cars arrived, their lights flashing but sirens silent. The boy froze, unsure of what was happening. He stopped pedaling, looking around nervously as officers stepped out of their vehicles and approached him. Their presence was intimidating, and the boy's heart raced. He had never been in trouble before, and he couldn't understand why all these adults were focused on him. One officer knelt down to speak at his level, trying to calm him, but the boy could barely find his words. He pointed to his bike and stammered, saying he was just riding, just playing, not doing anything wrong. The officers listened, but the neighbor's story had already set a tone that made them cautious. They asked questions, trying to clarify the situation, but each answer seemed to confirm the neighbor's exaggerated concerns, even though the boy's tone and expressions clearly showed innocence. As the situation unfolded, other neighbors began to notice the gathering. They came out of their homes slowly, curious and confused, wondering why police were talking to a young boy on his bike. Some whispered to each other, sharing brief comments about the scene, while others watched silently, unsure whether to intervene. The boy looked around at the growing crowd, feeling a mixture of fear and embarrassment. He didn't understand why this was happening, why his freedom to play and explore had suddenly become a matter of suspicion. The sunlight that had seemed warm and friendly now felt harsh and scrutinizing, shining on him as though highlighting some imagined wrongdoing. Inside her house, the boy's mother was preparing snacks for when he returned home. She had no idea that her calm afternoon was about to be interrupted by an alarming call from a neighbor. Moments later, she heard the distant sound of sirens and felt a sinking feeling in her chest. Something wasn't right. She quickly grabbed her car keys and rushed outside, scanning the street for her child. Her heart pounded as she saw the police cars and the growing crowd near the new neighbor's house. Panic and fear took over, but she focused on getting to her son as quickly as possible. When she arrived, she saw her boy standing next to the officers, looking confused and scared. His hands gripped the handlebars of his bike tightly, knuckles white. The police were asking him questions, and he tried to respond, but his voice trembled. He pointed to his bike again, tried to explain that he was just riding and playing, but the fear in his eyes was clear. The mother approached calmly but with authority, her presence commanding attention from everyone on the street. People started whispering among themselves, sensing that she was someone important, someone who could handle the situation in a way that would immediately restore order. The neighbor who had called the police was still standing nearby, her expression a mixture of irritation and satisfaction. She thought she had handled a potential threat, that she had done the right thing by calling the authorities. She hadn't expected the mother to arrive so quickly, to step into the scene with such calm confidence. The mother knelt down to her son's level, putting a hand on his shoulder, and spoke in a soothing voice, asking him to tell her what had happened. The boy, still shaking, explained everything. He talked about riding his bike, waving to neighbors, and suddenly seeing police cars arrive. He expressed his confusion, his fear, and the embarrassment he felt in front of the crowd. His mother listened carefully, nodding, letting him speak without interruption, showing that she believed him completely. The neighbor's expression began to change as she realized the boy's mother was not only calm, but also someone whose presence carried weight. The whispers among the crowd grew louder. Some neighbors were murmuring, recognizing the woman from her public appearances or mentioning her role in the city. The officers looked on, now unsure how to proceed, feeling the shift in the atmosphere. The woman who had called the police tried to find the right words, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. She hadn't anticipated that her actions would be questioned, or that the boy's mother would arrive with such authority and calm assurance. The boy's mother gently guided him away from the crowd, reassuring him that everything would be okay. She thanked the officers for coming and began to speak directly to the neighbor, explaining the misunderstanding without anger, without raising her voice. Her words were firm but polite, making it clear that assumptions and fear should not dictate actions, especially when it involved children. The neighbor shifted uncomfortably, realizing that her snap judgment had led to unnecessary alarm and embarrassment. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the boy's mother held his hand, guiding him back toward their house. The boy felt a mix of relief and awe, knowing his mother had taken control of the situation without any anger or confrontation. He looked up at her, understanding that she would always be there to protect him, to make sense of a world that sometimes made no sense at all. That afternoon, the boy learned a quiet but powerful lesson about courage, authority, and the calm strength that comes from someone who truly cares for you. Even after they reached the safety of their home, the boy could still feel the tension in the air, the eyes of the neighbors, and the lingering embarrassment of being judged unfairly. But he also felt pride. His mother had shown him that no matter how frightening a situation might seem, there was always a way to face it with dignity and calm. He realized that day that people's fear and assumptions could be powerful, but love, guidance, and understanding were stronger. The street gradually returned to its usual quiet rhythm, the laughter of children and the distant barking of dogs resuming their place in the afternoon air. But the memory of that moment, the police cars, the concerned faces, and most importantly, the strength of his mother, stayed with the boy. It was the beginning of a story he would carry with him, a story of unfairness met with calm authority, fear met with understanding, and a mother's love proving stronger than any misunderstanding. And as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns, the boy sat on his porch bike by his side, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude for the mother who had turned a frightening afternoon into a lesson of courage and strength. The moment the boy's mother arrived, the tension on the street shifted instantly. She parked her car quickly but carefully, her mind focused on reaching her son as soon as possible. The neighbors who had gathered began to notice her presence, some whispering to each other, others simply staring in curiosity. There was something in the way she moved and carried herself that demanded respect. Her eyes, calm but alert, scanned the scene, immediately taking in the officers, the boy, and the neighbor who had called the police. She did not raise her voice, but her presence alone seemed to signal that she was someone important, someone who could handle whatever situation had unfolded. The boy, still shaking slightly, looked up at his mother as she approached. Relief washed over his face, but it was mixed with embarrassment. He had never imagined that a simple bike ride could turn into something so serious. The mother knelt down to meet his gaze, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. Her voice was steady and soothing, asking him to tell her everything that had happened. The boy, taking a deep breath, explained in small, hesitant words. He talked about riding past the neighbor's house, waving to friends, and suddenly seeing the police cars arrive. He described the confusion, the fear and the shame of being treated like he had done something wrong when all he had done was be a child playing outside. Listening carefully, she nodded at him, reassuring him that he had done nothing wrong. She emphasized that he was brave and had acted with honesty, even in a frightening situation. She held his gaze and smiled, letting him know that she believed him completely. As she did this, the crowd of neighbors seemed to lean in slightly, watching the interaction. They could see the calm authority in her eyes, the way she radiated understanding, and the way the boy responded to her presence with immediate trust. The contrast between the mother's composure and the neighbor's previous anxiety was striking. The neighbor who had called the police was now looking uneasy. She had initially felt a sense of control and satisfaction, believing she had acted to protect her home. But now, standing in front of the boy's mother, she began to realize that she might have overreacted. Her eyes darted around the street as if searching for support, but the crowd's attention was fully on the boy and his mother. The officers, too, were adjusting their stance, no longer certain how to handle the situation. They could see that the mother's arrival had changed the dynamics entirely. What had started as a routine call about a child playing outside had become a delicate moment requiring tact and respect. The mother addressed the officers first, thanking them for responding and for ensuring her son's safety. She spoke calmly, giving clear instructions and clarifying what had happened from her son's perspective. She explained that he had been riding his bike, had not entered anyone's property, and was simply enjoying the afternoon. Her words were measured, deliberate, and unshakable. The officers nodded, recognizing the clarity and authority in her tone. They began to step back slightly, allowing her to take the lead in addressing the neighbor and the crowd. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The mother had taken control without raising her voice or causing a scene. Turning her attention to the neighbor, she spoke politely but firmly. She acknowledged that the neighbor had been concerned, and she understood that people sometimes act out of fear or misunderstanding, but she made it clear that assumptions and snap judgments, especially when they involve children, could lead to unnecessary fear, embarrassment, and even danger. Her words were calm, yet the impact was powerful. The neighbor's posture changed, her shoulders slumping slightly as she realized the gravity of the situation. The smugness she had felt moments before had evaporated, replaced by discomfort and a dawning recognition that she had overstepped. As the mother continued to speak, she included the assembled neighbors in the lesson, addressing the importance of community, respect, and understanding. She emphasized that children must be allowed to play and explore without fear of judgment or discrimination. Her voice carried a gentle authority, drawing the crowd's attention without seeming confrontational. The neighbors listened quietly, many nodding in agreement, realizing that this was more than just a simple incident. It was a moment to reflect on their own actions, their assumptions, and the way they interacted with the children in their community. Throughout the exchange, the boy stayed close to his mother, holding her hand and feeling reassured. He looked up at her with admiration and a growing sense of confidence. Even in the face of fear and misunderstanding, he realized that his mother's calm approach and steady presence could make a significant difference. He felt protected, supported, and seen for who he was rather than being judged by assumptions or appearance. This moment, although stressful, became an early lesson in trust, courage, and the power of a strong, caring parent. The officers, now fully aware of the situation's true context, began to interact more casually, speaking with the boy to ensure he was unharmed and explaining that misunderstandings sometimes happen. They thanked the mother again for her intervention, acknowledging that her presence had diffused what could have become a more serious situation. Their tone was respectful, reflecting the influence she carried even in her everyday interactions. The neighbor, on the other hand, struggled to find the right words to apologize. She muttered something vague, her embarrassment evident, but the mother accepted it with grace, emphasizing that the important thing was to learn and move forward. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, a few neighbors lingered, curious to see how the situation would end. Some approached the mother to express relief that the boy was safe and to comment on her composed handling of the incident. Others simply watched from a distance, absorbing the lesson silently. The boy's mother used the opportunity to encourage a sense of community responsibility, reminding everyone that protecting children did not mean jumping to conclusions or acting on fear. Her words carried weight because she spoke not from anger or authority alone, but from a place of care, experience, and integrity. Once the immediate tension had subsided, the mother guided her son back toward their house. She held his hand and walked slowly, allowing him to process everything that had happened. The boy felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear, but also a sense of pride. He understood that even when situations seemed frightening or unfair, he could rely on his mother to advocate for him, to guide him, and to model the right way to respond. This afternoon, although challenging, became a moment of learning and growth for both of them. Back inside their home, the mother and son sat together in the living room, taking a few minutes to breathe and talk openly about the experience. She asked him how he felt, what scared him the most, and how he thought the situation could have been handled differently. The boy shared his feelings honestly, recounting the fear he had felt when the police arrived and the embarrassment of having so many eyes on him. His mother listened attentively, nodding and validating his emotions. She reassured him that his feelings were natural and that he had done nothing wrong. The conversation strengthened their bond and reinforced the lesson that honesty, patience, and understanding are vital in navigating the world. Meanwhile, the neighbor remained on the street, visibly affected by the events. She no longer had the sense of control she had felt earlier. The community's eyes were no longer on her, but on the mother and child who had handled the situation with dignity and clarity. The realization of her mistake began to settle in, leaving her to reflect quietly on her own assumptions and fears. For many in the neighborhood who had witnessed the incident, it was a reminder of how quickly misunderstandings can escalate and how important it is to approach situations with empathy and care. As the afternoon turned into evening, the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Children resumed playing in the yards, dogs barked in the distance, and the quiet hum of daily life returned. However, the memory of the police presence, the tense moments on the street, and the calm authority of the boy's mother lingered. For the boy, it became a story he would carry with him, a story of fear met with calm, of misunderstanding met with clarity, and of the protective power of a loving parent. He knew that no matter what challenges he faced in the future, he had someone by his side who could guide him with wisdom, strength, and care. The incident, while initially frightening, had transformed into a meaningful life lesson, one that would shape the boy's understanding of fairness, trust, and courage for years to come. The boy's mother, standing firmly beside him, noticed the shift in the atmosphere around them. The once tense and chaotic street had quieted, but there was a weight in the air, a mixture of embarrassment, curiosity, and curiosity-driven whispers. The neighbor who had called the police seemed frozen, unsure of how to act now that the boy's mother had taken control. The mother's calm confidence radiated authority, and it became clear to everyone watching that she was not an ordinary parent. The officers, too, were watching her, waiting for her instructions and guidance, aware that she had a commanding presence that could manage the situation more effectively than they could. She gently took her son's hand, ensuring he felt supported and safe, and asked him to explain once more exactly what had happened. The boy, reassured by her presence, recounted the story carefully, describing how he had been riding his bike, waving to friends, and suddenly seeing police cars arrive. He explained his confusion and fear, highlighting that he had done nothing wrong. His mother listened intently, nodding and maintaining eye contact, reinforcing that he was being heard and believed. The crowd, watching this interaction, began to sense the fairness and calmness she brought to the situation. The neighbor who had called the police shifted uneasily, realizing that her actions were being carefully examined. The mother spoke to her directly, without anger or accusation, but with a firmness that made it clear that assumptions and fear should not guide one's actions, especially when children were involved. She emphasized the importance of understanding and fairness, pointing out that children should be allowed to explore and enjoy their neighborhood without being judged by appearances or assumptions. The woman's voice was calm but carried weight, and the neighbor began to grasp the error she had made. Her shoulders slumped slightly and she looked down, unable to meet the mother's steady gaze. The officers, recognizing the mother's authority, stepped back and allowed her to lead the conversation. She addressed them politely, explaining the sequence of events and clarifying that the boy had been innocent all along. Her explanation was precise, calm, and respectful, ensuring that the officers understood the context without feeling criticized. They nodded in acknowledgement, recognizing that the mother had diffused a situation that could have escalated unnecessarily. The air seemed to relax slightly, and the tension that had gripped the street began to lift. She then spoke to the neighbors who had gathered, sharing the importance of community awareness and responsibility. Her words were directed at everyone, not just the neighbor who had called the police. She highlighted that while it was natural to feel concern for safety, it was equally important to approach situations with empathy, to ask questions, and to avoid jumping to conclusions based on fear or bias. Her message was simple but powerful. Fairness, understanding, and kindness should guide interactions, especially with children. The neighbors listened, some nodding, some whispering to each other, absorbing the lesson without feeling scolded. The boy, standing beside his mother, began to regain his confidence. He realized that even when situations seemed frightening or unfair, the calm presence of someone who cared deeply could make a difference. He looked up at his mother with admiration, seeing not just a parent but a figure of strength, clarity, and wisdom. The mother smiled at him, gently squeezing his hand, silently communicating that he had nothing to fear and that he was safe. The neighbor, still standing across the street, now appeared deeply aware of her own mistake. She muttered a quiet apology, her voice barely audible, but the mother acknowledged it graciously, emphasizing that learning from mistakes was more important than dwelling on them. The humility in the neighbor's posture and tone was noticeable, a stark contrast to her earlier confidence and sense of authority. The officers observed quietly, realizing the moment had become an unspoken lesson in judgment, fairness, and community responsibility. As the mother continued to guide her son, she used the moment to teach him about courage and empathy. She explained that people sometimes act out of fear, but it was essential to respond with understanding, not anger. She reassured him that he had done nothing wrong and that he had the right to enjoy his neighborhood freely. Her words were patient and deliberate, ensuring he absorbed the lesson while also feeling safe and supported. The boy listened intently, nodding, his confidence slowly returning as he realized that his mother's guidance could navigate even the most stressful situations. The officers, now fully aware of the situation's context, engaged more casually with the boy, asking if he was okay and ensuring he felt comfortable. They acknowledged that misunderstandings happen and thanked the mother for her presence and clarity. Their tone was respectful, recognizing that she had effectively managed a situation that had begun as a routine call. The mother's approach demonstrated that authority could be exercised calmly, firmly, and with empathy, leaving a lasting impression on both the child and the community. Meanwhile, the neighbor began to retreat slightly, understanding that the moment had passed but also feeling the weight of the lesson. She had approached the situation with fear and assumptions, and now she realized the consequences of those actions. The mother, without making her feel humiliated, had highlighted the importance of reflection, empathy, and responsibility. The crowd, still observing, seemed to absorb the full impact of the encounter, witnessing firsthand how calm authority and compassion could transform a tense and unfair situation. The boy's mother then encouraged him to ride his bike back home, holding his hand as they walked a few steps together. She reminded him to always communicate clearly, to stay aware of his surroundings, and to trust that he was capable of handling challenges with integrity. The boy felt reassured, knowing he could always rely on his mother's guidance and support. He mounted his bike with a renewed sense of confidence, and with a gentle push from his mother, he began riding again, feeling the wind on his face and a sense of freedom returning. The neighbors, now dispersing slowly, continued to watch the boy ride, some exchanging comments about the situation and the mother's composed handling of it. A few even approached her to express gratitude for the example she had set, acknowledging that it was a powerful reminder of how to approach fear, assumptions, and interactions with children in the community. The mother responded with gentle smiles and kind words, reinforcing the sense of community and shared responsibility. Back at their house, the mother and son took a moment to sit together, reflecting on the day's events. She asked him to share how he felt during the incident, what scared him the most, and what he learned from it. The boy spoke openly, describing his fear when the police arrived, his confusion, and the embarrassment he felt. The mother listened attentively, validating his feelings and reinforcing that his emotions were natural and understandable. She explained that while fear and misunderstanding could happen, responding with calmness, honesty, and integrity could change the outcome entirely. The mother emphasized that the real lesson was about trust, respect, and the importance of community. She explained that people might act out of fear or bias, but it was possible to meet those moments with patience and understanding. The boy listened closely, absorbing the lesson, and felt a sense of pride in how his mother had handled the situation. He realized that courage wasn't just about facing danger, but also about staying calm, understanding others, and standing strong in the face of misunderstanding. As the evening approached, the neighborhood slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Children resumed playing, dogs barked in the distance, and the gentle hum of daily life returned. Yet the memory of the police presence, the tense moments on the street, and the mother's calm authority lingered. For the boy, the events of the afternoon became more than just a memory. They became a story he would carry with him for years. It was a story of courage, understanding, and the quiet but powerful strength of a parent who stood by her child through fear and misunderstanding. The mother's lessons were clear. Fear and assumptions could be powerful, but love, guidance, and calm authority were stronger. She had shown her son that no matter what challenges might arise, he could face them with integrity. Supported by someone who cared deeply for him, the boy felt a mix of relief, pride, and gratitude, knowing that his mother's presence had turned a frightening incident into a lesson in life, trust, and courage. Even as the sun began to set, casting warm shadows across the neighborhood, the boy knew he had learned something invaluable about fairness, empathy, and the quiet power of calm authority. After the initial tension of the afternoon had eased, the boy's mother stayed on the street with him, ensuring he felt fully safe and supported. She could see that he was beginning to relax, though traces of worry still lingered in his eyes. She crouched down beside him, placing her hands gently on his shoulders, and spoke softly. She asked him to tell her how he had felt in each moment, starting from when the neighbor had first watched him from her window, to the moment the police had arrived. The boy's voice trembled at first, but as he spoke, the mother nodded, listened carefully, and validated his feelings. She reassured him that fear in such situations was normal, and that it was never his fault for simply existing or playing in his neighborhood. As he spoke, the mother kept a calm, composed demeanor, showing the boy that she was completely in control of the situation. The officers standing nearby, still present from the earlier call, began to observe her. They could see that her calm, authoritative presence had diffused a tense scenario and brought understanding to all parties involved. The neighbor who had initially called the police now seemed unable to maintain her previous air of superiority. Her posture slumped and she avoided eye contact, muttering incoherent apologies under her breath. It became clear that she had underestimated the mother's influence and authority. The mother turned her attention toward the neighbor, speaking directly but without anger. She explained that while it was natural to feel concerned for safety, it was also crucial to approach situations with empathy and understanding. She emphasized that assumptions based on appearances could be harmful and that children deserved to be treated fairly and allowed to explore freely. Her words were gentle yet firm, leaving no doubt that while she understood fear, she did not condone actions born of prejudice. The neighbor's face reflected the weight of the lesson, a mixture of guilt, embarrassment, and reluctant understanding. The gathered neighbors watched silently, absorbing the situation. Some whispered to each other, reflecting on how quickly assumptions could lead to tension and fear, while others simply observed, impressed by the mother's composed handling of the entire scene. Her actions became a subtle but powerful example of leadership and grace under pressure. The officers, having witnessed the mother calmly address both the child and the neighbor, nodded quietly in recognition. They could see that she had successfully transformed a potentially negative incident into a learning opportunity for the entire street. The boy's mother then focused on the child, kneeling to his level once more. She explained that fear and misunderstanding could affect anyone, but that responding with calmness, honesty, and patience would always be the best course of action. She reassured him that he had nothing to fear, that he had done nothing wrong, and that he could always trust her to protect and guide him. The boy listened intently, his confidence slowly rebuilding. He began to understand that even in frightening or unfair situations, he could rely on his mother's wisdom and care to navigate the world around him. Meanwhile, the neighbor remained a few steps away, her earlier confidence replaced with a quiet awareness of her own behavior. She seemed to reflect on how quickly her fear had led her to call the authorities unnecessarily. The mother did not belittle her, but her calm and firm approach ensured that the lesson was clear. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse slowly, their expressions showing a mixture of respect for the mother's approach and contemplation about the power of assumptions. The air of tension had lifted, replaced by a sense of clarity and understanding. The mother guided her son toward their home, walking slowly to allow him to process everything that had happened. As they walked, she explained that it was essential to remain aware of surroundings, but not to let fear dictate actions. She encouraged him to communicate clearly, to be brave, and to always rely on his inner strength. The boy felt reassured by her words, holding her hand tightly as he walked, grateful for her protection and guidance. This moment strengthened their bond, reinforcing the sense of trust and love between parent and child. Back at their house, the mother and son took a quiet moment together. They sat on the porch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. She asked him how he had felt during the encounter, what had scared him the most, and what he thought could be learned from the experience. The boy spoke openly, describing his fear when the police arrived, the confusion of the crowd and the embarrassment of being judged unfairly. His mother listened attentively, validating his emotions and gently reminding him that he had handled the situation with bravery and honesty. Mother emphasized that the true lesson was not about fear, but about how people respond to misunderstanding. She explained that the neighbor's actions were not a reflection of the boy's worth or behavior, but rather a reflection of fear and assumptions. She highlighted the importance of staying calm, maintaining integrity, and responding with patience and understanding in difficult moments. The boy absorbed these lessons, feeling a sense of pride and reassurance. He realized that courage was not just about facing danger, but also about handling unfair situations with grace and composure. Outside, the neighborhood gradually returned to its normal rhythm. Children resumed playing in the yards, the distant barking of dogs filled the air, and the quiet hum of everyday life returned. Yet the impact of the afternoon lingered. The boy's mother had turned a tense and potentially harmful situation into a moment of learning and reflection for everyone involved. She had shown her son that fairness, empathy, and calm authority could overcome fear and misunderstanding. The lessons of that day would remain with him for years to come, shaping how he approached interactions, assumptions, and challenges in his own life. The neighbor, still standing across the street, seemed lost in thought. She had witnessed firsthand the power of calm authority and empathy. While she had initially acted out of fear, she had now been gently guided to reflect on her own assumptions and the consequences of her actions. The officers had also observed and learned from the mother's approach, understanding that leadership and guidance could be exercised without anger or harshness. The child, watching all of this unfold, began to internalize the lesson that courage, understanding, and integrity were stronger than fear and prejudice. As evening approached, the mother encouraged her son to ride his bike again, gently pushing him to regain the confidence he had lost earlier. The boy pedaled cautiously at first, but soon he was riding freely, feeling the wind on his face and the joy of a simple afternoon restored. His mother watched him with pride, knowing that he had learned not just how to handle fear, but also how to approach situations with patience, understanding, and integrity. She knew that these lessons would help him navigate the world with confidence and empathy. Later, inside their home, the mother and son reflected on the day's events one last time. She reminded him that people might act out of fear or misunderstanding, but it was always possible to respond with calmness, honesty, and integrity. She explained that the most important thing was to remain true to oneself, to act with empathy, and to trust in the support of those who loved and cared for him. The boy felt reassured, understanding that he had the strength to face challenges, guided by the wisdom and protection of his mother. The street outside slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm, with neighbors resuming their routines, children playing, and the soft sounds of suburban life continuing. Yet the memory of the police cars, the tense moments, and the mother's calm authority remained. It became a story that would be remembered quietly by those who witnessed it, a story of courage, empathy, and the quiet power of love and guidance. For the boy, it was a transformative experience, one that taught him that even in moments of fear or unfairness, there is strength in calmness, integrity, and the unwavering support of those who care deeply for us. The mother's lessons were clear. Fear and assumptions might influence people, but patience, understanding, and empathy could change outcomes and teach valuable lessons. She had demonstrated that true authority does not come from anger or intimidation, but from the ability to guide, protect, and inspire. The boy felt a deep sense of gratitude and pride, knowing that he had witnessed and experienced the strength of his mother's character firsthand. Even as the sun set, casting warm light and long shadows across the neighborhood, he understood that the lessons of the afternoon were lasting, shaping not only how he viewed the world, but how he would navigate it with courage, understanding, and integrity. The next morning, the boy woke up still thinking about the events of the previous day. Even as he brushed his teeth and ate breakfast, his mind replayed the moment the police had arrived, the crowd on the street, and most importantly, his mother's calm presence. He felt a mixture of relief, pride, and a little lingering anxiety. He had learned something important about fear, trust, and how people's actions could be influenced by assumptions. But he also knew that with his mother by his side, he could face challenges with courage and understanding. She had turned a frightening incident into a lesson he would carry with him forever. The mother had spent the night reflecting as well. She thought about the neighborhood, the children who played freely, and the adults who sometimes acted out of fear or misunderstanding. She knew that incidents like this could happen anywhere, even in quiet suburban streets, and she wanted to use the experience as a way to teach her son and the community about fairness, empathy, and responsibility. She prepared herself to have another conversation with the neighbor, not to shame her, but to reinforce the lesson in a way that could leave a lasting impression. Later that day, she took her son's hand and walked over to the neighbor's house. The woman who had called the police was sitting on her porch looking uneasy. When she saw the boy's mother approaching, she tried to offer a small smile, but it was nervous and uncertain. The mother greeted her politely, asking if she had a few minutes to talk. The neighbor hesitated, but then nodded, realizing that she needed to listen and learn from the situation. The mother invited her to sit down and began a calm, respectful conversation about the events of the previous day. She explained once more that while the neighbor's concern was understandable, acting solely out of fear or assumption could have consequences. Children deserve to be treated fairly, and misunderstandings could escalate quickly if not handled thoughtfully. She emphasized that it was not about blaming anyone, but about creating awareness and understanding. The neighbor listened, visibly uncomfortable but also thoughtful. She nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in the mother's words. It was clear that the conversation was having an impact, making her reconsider how she would approach situations in the future. The boy watched quietly, holding his mother's hand and feeling safe. He could see the neighbor's reaction and began to understand the power of calm communication, empathy, and guidance. His mother had taken a difficult moment and turned it into a teaching opportunity, not just for him but for the neighbor as well. He realized that leadership and courage were not about shouting or asserting authority aggressively, but about guiding others with patience and understanding. The boy felt inspired, proud of his mother and proud to learn from her example. After their conversation, the neighbor thanked the mother, expressing a small but sincere apology. She admitted that she had acted out of fear and had not considered the boy's perspective. The mother accepted the apology with grace, reinforcing that the important part was learning from mistakes and moving forward. The neighbor's body language softened, and she seemed more aware of how her actions could affect others. The boy felt a sense of relief, seeing that the tension from yesterday was beginning to dissipate and that understanding could replace fear. Back at home, the mother and son spent the afternoon together. They talked about the lessons of the day and reflected on how quickly fear and assumptions could escalate situations. She reminded her son that he should always be confident in himself, communicate clearly, and understand that not everyone would act fairly or kindly, but that he had the power to respond with integrity and patience. She also spoke about empathy, explaining that people sometimes make mistakes because of their fears, and that understanding and teaching others could help prevent future misunderstandings. The boy listened carefully, absorbing the lessons with a growing sense of maturity. He realized that he had learned far more than just a simple lesson about fear or assumptions. He had learned about resilience, the importance of calm authority, and the value of approaching others with empathy and understanding. Even as a child, he began to understand that these lessons would help him navigate life and relationships in a positive and meaningful way. He felt a deep sense of gratitude toward his mother, knowing that her guidance had protected him and turned a frightening experience into a life lesson. In the following days, the neighborhood began to notice a subtle change. The neighbor who had called the police now approached the children more cautiously and respectfully. She watched them play but refrained from making assumptions or acting out of fear. She seemed to have learned a valuable lesson about fairness and awareness, influenced by the calm and thoughtful guidance of the boy's mother. The boy himself returned to his afternoon rides with confidence, knowing that he had been heard, protected, and taught how to face challenges with integrity. The officers who had arrived on the scene also reflected on the situation. They recognized the importance of understanding the full context before taking action, and noted how a calm, authoritative parent could manage a tense situation better than force or suspicion alone. They remembered the mother's patient handling of the events and her ability to guide everyone involved without confrontation. For the boy, witnessing this reinforced the idea that authority and leadership could be exercised with empathy and understanding, creating positive outcomes even in challenging circumstances. Over time, the story of that afternoon quietly spread through the neighborhood. While it was not a sensational event, it became a subtle example of fairness, empathy, and responsible community behavior. Neighbors shared the story among themselves, noting the importance of patience, calmness, and understanding in dealing with fear and misunderstanding. The boy's mother became a quiet role model for the neighborhood, not through public recognition, but through her actions and the lessons she imparted in her daily life. The boy continued to ride his bike, play with friends, and enjoy the neighborhood with a new sense of awareness and confidence. He knew that while fear and misunderstanding could occur, he had learned how to respond with patience, courage, and empathy. He understood that mistakes could happen, even by well-meaning people, but that fairness, integrity, and clear communication could create understanding and resolve conflicts. These lessons became a part of his growing sense of self and his understanding of the world around him. The mother and son often talked about the importance of community, fairness, and empathy. She reminded him that life would always have moments of challenge and misunderstanding, but that responding with calmness, honesty, and integrity could make a difference. The boy took these lessons to heart, feeling empowered and supported. He realized that true courage was not just about facing danger, but also about handling difficult situations with grace and understanding. As the sun set over the neighborhood, the boy rode his bike slowly along the familiar streets, feeling the gentle wind on his face. He remembered the events of the previous day and the lessons he had learned. He felt proud of himself, of his mother, and of the way they had handled the situation together. The fear and tension had transformed into understanding and growth. He knew that the neighborhood would continue to be a place of learning, respect, and careful awareness, shaped in part by the calm and thoughtful guidance he had witnessed. In the quiet moments of that evening, the boy and his mother sat together on their porch. They reflected on the importance of fairness, empathy, and courage in everyday life. She reminded him that people's actions often reflected their own fears and assumptions, and that responding with patience, kindness, and understanding could change outcomes and teach lessons to others. The boy nodded, understanding the depth of the experience and feeling a sense of responsibility to carry those lessons forward in his own life. The story of that day became a quiet, lasting memory for the boy. He remembered the fear, the confusion, the arrival of the police, and the nervous glances of the neighbor who had called them. Most importantly, he remembered his mother's calm authority, her patience, and her unwavering support. He realized that these qualities were more powerful than fear, more influential than assumptions, and more enduring than any temporary tension. They had taught him lessons about courage, empathy, integrity, and the importance of standing strong with calm understanding. As the neighborhood settled into the evening, the boy felt a sense of peace and confidence. He knew that he could navigate challenges, face misunderstandings, and handle unfair situations with the lessons he had learned. He understood that fear and assumptions could never define him, and that with empathy, courage, and calm guidance, he could create positive outcomes in any situation. The mother's lessons had not only protected him, but had shaped the way he would understand the world and interact with it for years to come.